Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura, and today I'm wrapping up my Get Graphic With It readathon that I participated in. It was a readathon that ran from the 1st to the 7th of October that focused on reading graphic novels, comics, and comic books. Of course, my favorite thing to read, so why wouldn't I participate? I did. I didn't participate very well because the first day that the readathon was starting, I found out almost in the middle of the night that my water heater had gone and was spewing water. Not just like dropping water into the drain, but spewing water all over my basement. So in the middle of the night, had to get a repairman to come in and fix that for us, and then spent almost an entire day, at least until 6 a.m., scooping water out of the basement before we could even go to bed, and then the next 2 days just trying to clean up the mess. So ended up removing quite a lot of stuff from my basement. A lot of stuff is going to the dump. And you know, it's sad to see some of that stuff go, and certainly there were some things in there that were very sentimental, but at the same time I have a hard time getting rid of things, so this was a good way to just sort of clear out the basement. So that was that, and it took a lot of time away from being able to read. It's still not completely cleaned up, but and my house is an absolute shambles. So everything that we kind of could save from the damp zone, not from the wet zone, from the damp zone, is now literally just laying over every single surface on the main floor of my house. So it is just a disaster. And it looks horrible, and nobody is allowed over, not until that's cleaned up. So it'll be a while before we can get everything kind of put away again and get everything back down into the basement and rearranged. And yeah, it's such a disaster. Just a little bit of water, well, a lot of water. It's a lot of water, but it's amazing how much damage water can do. And you think you're being really clever by putting the plastic bins at the bottom and the cardboard boxes at the top on the shelf, but you know, it doesn't really help when the spray of water is upwards. Yeah, straight at your cardboard boxes, which just fell apart in our hands. That was good times. So at any rate, a couple days in, I did get to finally start reading for the readathon, and I did complete my readathon, so that's great. So I'm going to just go through all the titles that I read. I think I completed all the challenges except for one, which was Read with My Cuddle Buddy. I just didn't, and I didn't really have time, and I just wasn't comfortable to get down on the floor and read with one of them, so that just didn't happen, and I knew it wasn't really going to happen, so I wasn't surprised by that at all. But anyway, let's just get into these books. So the first title that I ended up picking up was Fun Home, a Family Tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. And this is a graphic memoir. It wasn't on my original TBR. I did place it on hold because it was on one of the host TBRs, which was one of the challenges. So I think Kat from Brews and Reviews read this, and she did do a mini review of it. So I will link that up in the cards, I think is up there. And it was pretty good. Like, I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It wasn't something that I loved. I wasn't completely compelled to read. I did have to put it down partway through the story and take a break and actually come back to it, which doesn't happen a lot in graphic novels, for me anyway. So there was a little bit, in my opinion, it just wasn't a story that to me grabbed me, but it was incredibly well written. It was really interesting. She has a fascinating life, and I was just amazed at how someone can be so reflective of their own life. You know, the fortune that she kept a diary, but that she would be able to link just sort of the way that she wrote in her diary to what was going on in her life, and how her perceptions are changed, or how her, you know, things around her had changed. And it was really amazing at how she could just sort of pinpoint all of these things in her life and write about them in a very interesting way, and really kind of show what was going on in her life. It is a very reflective story. It is a story of coming to terms with her sexuality. It is a story of very much comparing her life, or her relationship, her very complicated relationship with her father, and seeing the parallels in his life and how they kind of compared to her own life. And so it is very interesting, but it's very personal, and I think maybe that was the thing for me, is that it's a little too personal, and it's a little something that I don't understand. I think her life is just so incredibly different and opposite to my own life that I found it very hard to relate to, because I knew that it was nonfiction. If I had understood this to be fiction, I would have been like, oh, this is, you know, fantastic, and, you know, I would have found it really compelling and stuff. But because it was nonfiction, I just found it really hard, because she's just so incredibly different from me. Her life experiences, it was fascinating, but just very, very different. I also found that this was a very slow reading process, and I think it is a really good title if you are a primarily prose reader, to help transition you or help bring you into the world of comics, because this is a prose novel. It is a prose novel with pictures is basically what this is. It is not what I would typically call a graphic novel. The pictures are unnecessary in this story. It is almost entirely narrated through text, and then the pictures just sort of illustrate what that text is saying. It's not that they are doing anything extra or different or special. So personally, I found that this is more of a prose novel, and if you were a prose reader, you will really, I think, get a lot more out of this, and it'll really kind of heighten your reading experience because there are those accompanying images. But for me, because I am primarily a comic book reader, this is a different type of reading experience, and so it is a very slow reading experience. It's not my favorite way to read comics. Although I will say that the prose writing is very good in this, and it really does continue to propel you forward, even though it is a very slow read as far as comic books are concerned. So I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it was very good. It wasn't perfect for me, but it was very, very good, and I definitely would recommend it, particularly if you are a prose reader and you want to try comics. This is a great first book. So the next title I picked up is another memoir, and that's Turning Japanese, a graphic memoir by MariNaomi. Now, I probably shouldn't have read this immediately after that, because this one does not compare nearly as well as that one. So that one was quite a bit better written than this one. This one still has a similar kind of art style, and it still has sort of a narration at the beginning of the comic. Primarily the narration is just a short piece of text, and then you've got quite a bit more action underneath the narration. So it is a little bit different in that respect, but the story isn't half as compelling, unfortunately. This is a story about a woman who is half Japanese, and she's trying to reclaim that cultural identity, I think. At least that's sort of how you think it's supposed to go, but in the end, nothing really ever is resolved, nothing kind of comes of it, and she seems to forget everything that she had, you know, set out to do. So she starts this journey by discovering that there are host clubs in, I can't remember, San Francisco, where she is, and she ends up, you know, becoming a host or hostess at these clubs, and sort of starts to learn about how to, you know, be a hostess. And then she basically saves up enough money, and she and her boyfriend go to Japan. She gets a job in a temporary 3-month visa to be a hostess at a club there. In the meantime, she's trying to learn Japanese. She gets not very far, like beginner's level, I think, Japanese. And I think that's pretty much it. Like, that's generally what happens at the end. She doesn't know any Japanese, and she goes home. Like, I don't know what the point of this was, and I don't know, maybe it resolved something for her, but it really left a lot to be desired. I didn't feel that depth that I felt from the other one. I don't feel like it was as reflective or as meaningful. I felt it just didn't feel as genuine that this was a necessary memoir. So yeah, I didn't really care for this. I think it gave it 2 stars. Art was okay. The story was interesting until you realize nothing was happening. So I'm glad I read it, but I'm not curious about it anymore. And then I'm pretty sure I read this one next. This is Crawl Space by Jesse Jacobs. This was my title for blue on the cover, just because every color is on the cover. And it is so trippy and fantastic. It's basically a psychedelic version of Narnia. A girl discovers that there's another world inside of her kind of dryer, I think, and she brings some friends into the dryer. into this other weird world, and they kind of, I think it's almost like there's a crack in enlightenment, and you know, people who gain enlightenment are usually people who have earned it and who have been studying and who have been practicing to gain this enlightenment, and these cracks in sort of like the fabric of the world kind of allow people who shouldn't have enlightenment into enlightenment. I think that's basically what this is. It's kind of new agey, kind of metaphysical. It's just super weird. The art in it is so strange and colorful and fantastic. And at the beginning, you know, it's strange and it's hard to get your mind into it. You know, the beginning it starts with different kind of colors and shapes and just sort of like them aligning together, and you're just like, I'm not sure what I'm doing. How am I supposed to read this? And as you go, at the sort of very beginning, it's just like, basically it says like, it'll be intense, but you will adjust. You know, it'll be okay. You'll get over it. And I know it's one character talking to the other, but it really did feel like it was the author telling you, like, just sort of let it happen. You'll get into the story. It'll be okay. So I really liked this. I thought it was totally worth reading. I think it would be good to read it again. But it is super trippy and super fun and colorful, and I really liked it. So yeah, this was really well done. There is a lot of sort of philosophy kind of thrown at you, or sort of spirituality kind of thrown at you, some discussions partway through, which may or may not be a turn off for you, but I thought it was a lot of fun to read, and just totally weird, and I'm looking forward to checking out his other titles. So I know that there's another one out there. I can't remember what the title is called at the moment, but this was fun. I ended up reading Mudbite by Dave Cooper's Mudbite by Eddie Table. I gave this 1 star. I like the largeness of the book, and I like the what's that called, landscape direction of the work. The art, I had said that the art looked kind of like 1930s. There's sort of a 1930s look to it. I would say probably infused sort of like Nickelodeon cartoons. It has a very Ren and Stimpy-like style. I didn't understand what was going on or why it was going on, and a lot of times it's sort of these very buxom women who are kind of either it's sort of like unconscious or completely mindless, and so I just didn't understand, and it didn't work for me, and I didn't really understand, yeah, the role of the female in this just didn't work for me. I didn't really appreciate it, and I didn't understand the point of it. So, which was often true for Ren and Stimpy. I didn't often understand the point of it. So this was a no-go for me, unfortunately. But I did really like that it was, you know, this way, and then another comic was this way. Unfortunately, the comics weren't worth reading. I read Capture Creatures by Gibson and Dreistadt. This is a kids comic. It's basically the story of a girl who lives on an island. This island is sort of a man-made or human-made island, and it is sort of I think a time in the world where animals don't exist, and so there are scientists on the island who are trying to recreate animals. She ends up discovering this little raccoon who can actually like throw flames out of its head, and they go on a little adventure. It is very cutely drawn. The characters are super duper cute, but the writing leaves a lot to be desired. So unfortunately it just feels like whole chapters are completely missing. There are some really weak transitions between scenes, so it's hard to follow the story, but overall I think the art was really cute. I can't remember if I gave this 2 or 3 stars. It's probably like a 2.5 star read for me. I also read Juana and the Dragonewts 7 Kingdoms by Kiyohisa Tanaka. This actually was really cute. I was surprised by how much I liked it. Probably still not something that I would buy, but I did really enjoy it. And it is basically the story about Dragon World. So it's about this dragon here. His job is that he goes and kind of pilfers through kind of ruins and things and discovers items by the now extinct, I can't remember what they're called, but I think that they were just humans, and they have another word for them. So he's looking for items that were used by this now extinct race, and when he is out one day, he ends up discovering an egg, and out from that egg pops, what do you know, a little human girl. So he is now on the hunt, or he is now attempting to return her to wherever she came from, to return her to her family, even though she seems to be the only known human in existence. So the beginning of this story is just kind of establishing the characters and the fact that they're going to go on this epic kind of adventure quest. I don't know really where it's going to go, but I thought the art was really cute in it. The characters are really sweet. It just looks like a lot of fun. And yeah, if you like kind of fantasy quests with really cute, caring characters, I suspect it's going to be quite a lot about that. I would recommend it because it's cute. The next title that I picked up was The Case of the Missing Man, Hobtown Mystery Stories by Kris, Bertin, and Alexander Forbes. I really like this. I think I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The cover design looks like a Nancy Drew, totally sells as a Nancy Drew, and it feels like a remade grown-up version of a Nancy Drew story. It is a complicated, kind of gruesome, potentially gruesome mystery, and it does have fantastical points in it, so it does have require you to kind of leave some of your skepticism behind while you read it, but it was really well constructed story. I was really compelled to read the story, and I thought that the mystery was really handled well. I think actually that comics sometimes really struggle with mysteries because you aren't able to kind of be as subtle with your writing. You have to be a little bit more overt with your writing when you're writing it, but I think this one was quite a bit more subtle. I think that it allowed the progression of the mystery to just sort of slowly unwrap rather than just be like, bam, okay, here's the result. So it really did kind of develop on itself, and I was completely tracking in a different direction, and then the mystery took me in a different direction, so I was really impressed with that because it's very rare when I am not able to solve a mystery in a book, in a novel, from the first, third of the book. Usually I have it figured out. So this one I actually was thrown for a loop, which was fantastic. I was super impressed with it. I think that kind of in the middle got a little bit dry for me. It is quite text heavy, as you can see. There's a lot of explanation, but I think that's just required in writing a complicated mystery story. But overall, I really, really like this. Certainly, if you are into mystery stories, I would say this is a really good title. You should definitely check it out. Also, set in Canada, which is fantastic, in New Brunswick, which I've never been, but it doesn't matter. Set in Canada, that's always awesome. And if I wanted to, this book actually satisfies a lot of the challenges for me. So, black and white, female lead, over 200 pages, new to me series. So, this one covers a lot of ground for me, and I really enjoyed it. My library doesn't have the second volume in the series, so I'm going to have to see if they can get it for me because I really want to keep reading it, and it was really, really fantastic. I read a kids comic, which was supposed to be a comedy. I don't really know that it was a comedy, and I gave it 1 star because it kind of sucked. And that is BroBots and the Shoujo Shenanigans by J. Torres and Sean Dove. It is a very tiny comic, so you can see that there isn't enough time for anything to happen. Basically, this is a story about the BroBots, and they want to go and see some pop singer, and something happens, and they have to rescue everyone. I think that's as much as I can tell you, because otherwise there's a spoiler, but that is the entirety of the story. I feel like this was referencing too much sort of otaku culture, that if you do not belong in otaku culture, or you've not been indoctrinated in otaku culture, which I suspect you wouldn't at the age that you would be expected to read this, you would find this confusing. Or you would kind of accept it as it is, which is fine, but I think that maybe these subtleties, which are not very subtle, shouldn't have been included. So I don't know, there was something about it, just rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't think it was a very well constructed story. And oh yeah, and then the thing that really was a bother to me was that this is obviously digitally drawn, but it's sloppy. It's got a poor resolution printing, so you can see the pixels as they're printed on the page, and then a lot of the boxes are not cleaned, so like the edges, sometimes the line is drawn a little too far, and then the corners are not clean corners. So let's see, even like here you can see that a line was drawn, but you can see that the line goes like right into the gutter there. So like that's just a little sloppy for me. And the art is as simple as this is, like that could have been cleaned up. So I didn't appreciate the quality of the production as well as the story. I read another title which was more of a comedy, also a kid's title, and that is Mr. Wolf's Class by Aaron Nels Stanky. And totally recommend it if you have kids. This is a lot of fun. Basically, it's Mr. Wolf's first day of teaching at school, and he has a new class, and you're introduced to all the different characters and everything that they do. The art looks like this. It's just quite colorful. So they have lunch and they play games and just sort of like the everyday regular things that you would do on your first day of school. There's lots of little shenanigans, and Mr. Wolf has a full day of trying to keep these kids sort of together. It's just fun. It was colorful and fun and cheerful and just totally delightful, and I really, really would recommend checking it out. So the next title that I read is Shit Is Real by Chef Franz. This was published by Drawn and Quarterly, so it is sort of an indie comic. The art looks like this. So it's just sort of a little bit simplified. It's basically the story about a young woman, and she's living in another post-apocalyptic world. Basically, technology is your sort of ticket to civilization. She has decided to quit her job. Her boyfriend has recently left her, and so she's sort of feeling kind of lost, I would say. And then she discovers her neighbor is living sort of the life of luxury that she wants, and her neighbor isn't there very often, and she discovers her card key. She discovers her card key and basically lets her in to live this neighbor's life. There's lots of other things that are going on as well throughout this story, but it is, I thought, was actually really good. It was really interesting. It was really kind of trippy. There was a lot of sort of like hallucinating sequences or dreamlike sequences that I thought were really kind of clever, and I just really enjoyed it as a story. It felt like modern dystopia. I think that's what it was, is that you could feel sort of the truth of the situation in modern day times. Like you needed your credit card in order to be seen as sort of popular or part of civilization. You needed this technology in order to kind of do any of your daily life living. You couldn't just sort of live away from that. So it was really interesting, and I definitely, if you like kind of more independent comics, I think this is a good title to read. Again, another female lead, blue in the cover, over 200 pages. So I really am covering most of these challenges with most of these books. And then the last thing that I read is Nisekoi False Love Volume 1 by Naoshikomi. This is sort of the love triangle story. It is a shonen manga, so it is romance told through a different perspective. It's more a comedy rather than a romance. And basically it's about a boy who is the young son of a gangster family, and about a girl who is the oldest daughter of a gangster family. He is kind of wimpy, and he's got this crush on a girl that many years before they had made a promise that when they met again in the future they would get married. So he has this major crush on this girl, but he discovers that his family and the other girl's family are kind of at a point where they could be at war with each other, and so the heads of the family have decided that these two are going to pretend that they are in a romantic relationship to kind of stop the fighting between the two families. So now he has to pretend to be in a relationship with this other girl. The other girl and him, they of course are not, are complete opposites. So she's quite tough and quite spirited, and he's of course really kind of has a limited personality, and he's kind of wimpy. It's basically what it is. So they fight immediately, and it is sort of war between the two of them, but they also have to pretend to be in love with each other. Of course, you know what the direction is going to be for the story, but primarily this is a setup for comedy. And it is, for me, I don't like love triangles to begin with, and I don't like this type of comedy, so volume 1 is enough. I don't need to read any further. I know where this is going, so I just was curious about what the title was because I've heard of it many times and I just didn't know what it was about. Glad I don't need to know anymore. Yeah, it's just not for me, but certainly I think it is pretty well written, at least at the beginning. The character dynamic is fun, and Shenanigans should be entertaining if you like that kind of comedy. So yeah, I have nothing against it. I gave it 3 stars. It's just not a title for me. And then I started 2 other titles. The first one is Tank Girl, so I haven't finished reading this yet. I was just a little bit surprised at how slapstick comedy this was, or how kind of obnoxious the comedy was in this. I was not expecting the comedy, and I'm very specific about my comedy, so this one was a little bit hard to take, so I need a little bit of distance from it before I get back into it, because now I know what to expect. I can enjoy it a lot better, but it was weird. That's all I have to say about that. And then the other title that I began but I didn't finish, I actually didn't get very far, is Made in Abyss by Akihito Tsukushi. And like I said, I am put off by the gray tone. I find that it really muddies the art. It's hard to see the high detail. It's hard to see and read depth, and I think it was a poor choice. And as I was reading it, I was finding that I was struggling to see it really well. It could be that I have older eyes than a lot of people who are reading this. But yeah, so I'm going to have to try again. I might hang on to this for a little while if there are no holds, and try it again next week. Anyway, I had a good week. I think I read some real variety of titles. I certainly read some titles that I really liked and some titles that I really didn't. And I like kind of the big array of experience with reading lots of different kinds of things like that. So I was really happy that I participated. I got a lot of reading done. I was hoping to read that much anyway, but I think readathons always push me to read a little bit more, which is great. And yeah, so it was a good week for me. And now all these books can go back to the library. I'm probably just going to hang on to about 3 because I still want to read. I still have Superman, which I wanted to read, and The Fixer, and X-Men Grand Design, and then the 2 that I just showed you, so I guess that's 5 that I want to read, so maybe I'll read them next week. Hopefully I can hang on to them that long. Anyway, I think that's it for me. If you've read any of these titles, would love to hear it. If you are planning to read any of these titles, would love to hear it. And if you have any recommendations for graphic novels that you think that I would enjoy reading, I would love to hear it. That's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.